lockdown started for me on April 1st. It was supposed to be for 7 days, but now it's extended to the 21st day.
For much of the world, the end of pandemic is in sight. But for China, it is still a major problem and is imposing a great economic cost. China's zero COVID approach in the aftermath of the Wuhan breakout in early 2020 rested on a 76-day mass lockdown, mass testing, intense surveillance, isolation, quarantines, and border closures. Though brutal, it helped check the spread of the COVID-19 virus during 2020 and 2021. It kept the number of deaths to a minimum. It was a dramatic and a forceful demonstration of Chinese might and resolve, in stark contrast to what we saw in the United States and other wealthy Western states.
More than 2 years into this pandemic, the U.S. death toll is the highest in the world.
Denials, delays, incompetence, and polarization left 330,000 Americans dead by the end of 2020. 1 million Americans had officially died from COVID-19 by May 2022, at which point Chinese reported a merry 5,200 fatalities. Even if the actual death count in China is 10 times higher, it remains modest for a population of 1.4 billion people. It's just a fraction of the US COVID-related deaths. In April 2022, Shanghai had 26,000 fresh cases every day at its peak. But when the city reopened after a 60-day lockdown, the number of fresh cases daily fell to just 29. To Chinese leadership, this transition is proof that zero COVID has succeeded again. The problem is that the Chinese have not gained immunity like the populations in the West and the rest of the world, because they were not exposed to the virus. Despite the huge economic and psychological costs that zero COVID policy is imposing on the Chinese, President Xi Jinping is not willing to budge. Chinese leadership argues it simply cannot afford at present to shift course and reopen, exposing and risking the lives of the under-vaccinated Chinese elders. So much of Chinese population is immunologically naive that losses might exceed 1 million deaths if China reopens before they have introduced proper protective measures. President Xi Jinping imposed zero COVID because he wanted to contrast the high death count, chaos, and perceived incompetence in America with the low death count and efficiency in China. But as a result, he backed himself into a corner. It's like riding a tiger. You better not get down. Why can't Chinese change its policy now? Governments change policies all the time, right? British Prime Minister Liz Truss did a U-turn and reversed a decision to abolish 45% tax on the top bracket within a few days. And her new finance minister killed the rest of her plan after the finance markets reacted negatively. Even the Indian Prime Minister did a U-turn and scrapped the controversial agricultural reform laws after an year-long protest by farmers, mostly from Punjab.
ये बताने आया हूं कि हमने 3 कृषि कानूनों को वापस लेने का, रिपील करने का निर्णय लिया है.
Just like Xi Jinping, Narendra Modi has a strongman image which is very vulnerable to such humiliating U-turns. But Modi's position is stronger than ever. Why can't President Xi Jinping do it? He can't do it because, unlike in other countries, going back on zero COVID policy would tarnish his image as a strong and competent leader. It would also undermine the very reason he became president in 2012 and threaten the very existence of the Communist Party. To understand this, we need to go back to history. China had been changing dramatically in the past few years when Xi Jinping became president in 2012. A large home-owning middle class had emerged within the previous decade or two. Private enterprise had been growing rapidly and most Chinese living in cities felt little connection with the party. Those were the days when social media had just emerged as a tool for communication. Smartphone ownership was surging, and Chinese were using smartphones and social media to share their grievances. Many small NGOs were springing up, championing the rights of the downtrodden. Most of these grievances were about government corruption, and splits were emerging in the party. A rival to Mr. Xi Jinping, Bo Xilai, a charismatic and good-looking Chinese leader in the southwestern province of Chongqing, was trying to win public support by ostentatiously fighting corruption and talking against the Communist Party. You got to remember that this was the time of Arab Spring, when many Arab dictators, including Hosni Mubarak of Egypt, got toppled because of mass protests by their citizens. Looking at all these developments, the Chinese Communist Party felt threatened and feared it might get toppled too by its citizens. Because of the secrecy and censorship, the outside world did not know that the Communist Party felt threatened. The West saw a country that had weathered the storms of the global financial crisis of 2007 and 9 and was rising fast. So the Communist Party elite elected Xi Jinping as a solution to all these problems and to strengthen the grip of the Chinese Communist Party on power. Xi Jinping did exactly that and then some.
When Xi Jinping came to power a decade ago, he inherited a China that was rising economically and diplomatically. But under his watch, it's become less open and more conservative.
I think the last 10 years, Xi will rightly trumpet some of his big achievements. They've ended extreme poverty in China, and there's been a lot of progress made in terms of, stamping out corruption within the Communist Party. But from a societal level, Xi has also taken China back into an era of ideology not seen since Mao Zedong years.
This municipality is the size of Austria, and the place where Xi ousted his main leadership rival, Bo Xilai. Today, Chongqing has undergone a population and construction boom that some say masks a backsliding in freedoms.
As the Chinese Communist Party elites and Xi Jinping saw it, there were three enormous problems that were threatening its very survival. First is corruption, second is factionalism within ruling parties, and third, the central leadership in China was losing touch with ordinary citizens and their needs. So Xi Jinping attacked all the three problems soon after he became president in 2012. Mr. Bo Xilai, a member of the Politburo Committee, the most powerful committee in China, was arrested for corruption and abuse of power early in 2012. And months after Mr. Xi Jinping took office as president, Mr. Bo Xilai was put on trial and sentenced in 2013 to life in jail. He was accused and convicted of corruption and of plotting a coup against the government. Apparently, assets worth more than 14 billion were seized from Mr. Bo Xilai's family and associates. They also prosecuted many other powerful Communist Party members for corruption in a nationwide crackdown against graft. Most, if not all, of those who were prosecuted under corruption charges happened to be rivals of Mr. Xi Jinping. So with one stroke, he addressed both corruption and factionalism within the party. To redistribute the wealth and power large tech platforms have accrued over the past decade, President Xi Jinping launched a startling assault on the country's 4 trillion tech industry. There have been over 50 regulatory actions against scores of firms for a dizzying array of offenses, from antitrust abuses to data violations. Total market capitalization of tech companies reduced by $1 trillion because of this assault. This is when the founder of Alibaba went missing for a long time. Besides the measures mentioned above, President Xi Jinping also took some direct measures to strengthen the presence of the party in every aspect of life. He revived neighborhood party committees and injected them in private firms.
HSBC is one of the world's biggest banks. You must have heard about it. HSBC, it has set up a Communist Party committee within the organization of.
So that means Communist Party members sit on the board of private companies and tell them what to do. Mass mobilization of people required to impose COVID-related lockdowns and conduct regular mass testing, enforcing quarantine, and conducting door-to-door inspection is being done by Communist Party cells, not police or bureaucrats. Mr. Xi also created new party groups, often with himself in charge, to oversee the work of government ministries. As he puts it, East, West, South, North, and Center, the party leads everything. So during his 10-year rule, he has conducted sweeping purges of the party and security forces to remove the corrupt and political enemies, including many allies of the party elders. He has turned a fractured party that has disappeared from many ordinary people's lives into an omnipresent, ideologically recharged, tech-enabled machine. He has crushed dissent, wiping out much of civil society, building a gulag for Muslims in Xinjiang, and gutting Hong Kong's freedoms. When China was facing an unprecedented change in the 4-year period between 2008 and 2012, it could have opted to take another path. China could have seen that as an opportunity to reform itself economically and politically and open up its society. To understand why it did not, you need to understand how obsessed China is with the collapse of the Soviet Union.
In Moscow, the hammer and sickle is lowered for the last time, and an era comes to an end.
I am ceasing my activities in the post of President of the USSR.
Soviet Union officially collapsed in 1991 when the then President Mikhail Gorbachev stepped down and declared the USSR dead on Christmas Day 1991. America and the other Western countries celebrated this event and congratulated themselves for the next 3 decades, but China conducted an autopsy on it to make sure that the same thing does not happen to China. The Chinese Communist Party has written thousands of internal papers, held study sessions, and even produced a documentary about the downfall of its former rival and ideological cousin. It drew some important conclusions from this study. One of the major lessons is never criticize yourself publicly. Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev, who became the president of Soviet Union after Joseph Stalin, criticized his predecessor. That, the Chinese Communist Party thinks, sowed the seeds of ruin for Soviet Union. Mikhail Gorbachev, under his policy of glasnost, which roughly translates in English to openness, said the time has come for increased government transparency and freedom of expression.
To my mind, something like fresh air in our society, you see.
It's a great freedom.
I think that glasnost is a first step towards real democracy in our society.
After decades of censorship and secrecy, suddenly banned books were allowed to return to libraries, and many citizens learned about former leader Joseph Stalin's atrocity for the first time. China believes this sudden opening up only accelerated the collapse. This is the reason Mao Zedong is never criticized, even though he's responsible for what Washington Post called the biggest mass murder in the history of the world. His Great Leap Forward policy from 1958 to 1962 led to the deaths of up to 45 million people because of mass executions, tortures, and mass starvations. That is easily much more than the number of deaths Joseph Stalin or Adolf Hitler is responsible for. Adolf Hitler is not celebrated by Germany anymore, but Mao Zedong is celebrated by the Chinese Communist Party, and his picture still hangs in Tiananmen Square. China can't change its zero COVID policy unless its scientists come up with a safe way out, despite the huge economic and psychological cost, for 3 reasons. First, doing so would mean admitting that the party was wrong, and that can never happen, especially since Mr. Xi Jinping has personally identified himself with the zero COVID policy. Second, the inevitable increase in deaths the lifting of strict lockdowns would cause will challenge the party's narrative of efficiency and competence. And third, it will deny the party an opportunity to strengthen its roots in the lives of Chinese people by conducting COVID-related mass mobilizations. So the lockdowns are likely to remain until he is sure that doing so will not lead to a surge in deaths. If you like such macro picture videos, I recommend you watch these two, where I analyze the Indian and the Chinese economies. I'm Sharat Mantravadi. Thanks for watching.